Game keycards continue to be one of the most controversial topics this year in the gaming sector. It is essentially physical media that's not really physical media. It's physical media with none of the benefits of physical media. As explained right here on Nintendo's official website, it is essentially a cartridge that serves as a key to access data that you have downloaded. It's not that the data is inside the actual cartridge, but rather you still have to download the full game digitally. The card just acts as a means to actually access the downloaded software. So it's just more inconvenient digital downloads is effectively what this is. And one other area, aside from the inconvenience of that, where this negatively impacts customers is in the inability for customers to be able to keep their games forever, because if servers go down for the services from which you download your games from, then that game key card is worth nothing. And even if it happens decades down the line, it will happen eventually. And then just the general lack of games preservation for the ones that do release exclusively on a game key card. I mean, we've already seen research about the lack of preservation efforts and how that's led to, freaking 87% of classic video games disappearing, missing, and just totally disappearing from the face of the planet because there's just no preservation efforts surrounding them. This was back in 2023. That number has likely grown since. And so this is a topic that has come up a lot, especially because, people were really pleased to hear that Nintendo Switch 2 would still be using cartridges. But then with this new game key card format, people are realizing that, it's almost like a red herring. Nintendo is clearly trying to follow other companies into that digital future, when once upon a time, especially with the Switch 1, it felt like Nintendo, at least with game cartridges, they were, with that format, one of the last bastions of true physical media that houses all of the game content inside that card. While Nintendo itself is releasing their games fully on proper physical media, it is giving third-party entities an excuse to essentially forego that true physical media route. And I feel like with every passing week, month, we learn new ways in which why game key cards are far from ideal. And the latest on that front concerns Japan's National Diet Library. For those who don't know, Japan mandates that media has to be preserved if they can be preserved. The National Diet Library, as highlighted by news outlet Automaton right here, the National Diet Library, or NDL, is one of the largest libraries in the world, and it's also Japan's only legal deposit library. It mandates domestic publishers to submit copies of all new publications for collection and preservation purposes. So there's a legal mandate, but game keycards essentially can circumvent that legal mandate to preserve media. Basically, it comes down to game keycards not being eligible for preservation because they can only preserve what's housed within physical media, but game keycards, while it is a physical thing you can carry around, doesn't actually have the game data in it. And so for the National Diet Library, that physical media is practically useless for them. It offers no means of preservation. When Automaton reached out to the NDL for comment about this, here's what a representative had to say. Only physical media that contains the content itself is considered eligible for preservation. Since a keycard on its own does not qualify as content, it falls outside of our scope for collection and preservation. And this is something that we all knew. It's just we're seeing official organizations that are in charge of legally preserving media that is housed physically, just straight up confirming what we already knew and all coming up to the same conclusion that game keycards for preservation, for collecting, and for just actually featuring content that is accessible is practically useless. It's just digital media without the convenience of you being able to just carry around all of your games in one package, having to carry around cartridges instead. It is just ecologically worse digital downloads, digital media. Due to the nature of game keycards, the NDL is essentially treating game keycards as digital-only releases because that's precisely what they are. It's just a digital-only release with an extra step to be able to access them. And there's an organization that started to preserve video games as far back as 2000, or specifically October of 2000. That's when the library started housing media such as video game CDs and cartridges in proper archival conditions, becoming the key institution for preservation of Japanese games. And you can see right here, they have quite the collection on their hands, possessing over 9,600 video game titles, including most titles published domestically since October of 2000, only physical releases, but also retroactively, they've been able to get games that were released prior to October of 2000 via donations that people have given to ensure that some form of this game and the physical media that houses it is collected and preserved and is something that history can remember and not disappear from the face of the planet. But this effort is rendered moot with the existence of Game Keycard. And sure, game developers and game companies can still choose to release their games via true physical media where all the game data is housed in a proper game card, which is what CD Projekt Red did. They actually took great efforts to ensure that the Ultimate Edition of Cyberpunk 2077, which features all of the content for this game, including its Phantom Liberty expansion, could be housed within the 64 gigabytes game card. But the issue with giving publishers that are not as generous or consumer friendly or, mindful of preservation, the choice of going with game key cards is game companies tend to prefer the easier, the cheaper, the more affordable, the less inconvenient route, which is why if you look at the list of Nintendo Switch 2 games that'll see a game keycard release, it is quite the extensive list. Most third-party games so far have released in game keycard form. Game keycards are not the exception, they're the rule. They're becoming the norm. And so most Nintendo Switch 2 games cannot be preserved by even organizations like the NDL, which are dedicated to mandating that physical media, what is preservable does get preserved. Nintendo's game keycard format effectively renders the NDL's games preservation efforts null and void. And it's much more difficult to do collections of digital media because of the DRMs that are attached to them, because of the way companies, keep a tight leash when it comes to controlling players' ability to access those titles. Most storefronts don't function like GOG, where you download the game file and that's yours to do with what you want and what you wish. You can copy and paste it. You can lend it out to people. It feels like you actually own that digital media. That is not the case with most game storefronts, where they have heavy DRMs to ensure that only one copy can be accessed by one person or, one console, you name it, one device. So it makes that process of preserving digital media and having sort of a library for that stuff that, can ensure that those games continue to exist in some way, shape, or form significantly more complicated and difficult. And look, this is nothing new. Nintendo's not the first to jump on the bandwagon of useless physical media. We're seeing it everywhere now where, game discs, Blu-ray discs that can house tons of game data ultimately don't have all of the data or require some kind of download so that the game can run, even if the majority of the data is housed in the physical media, in the disc. There's still a requirement of you got to download a key of sorts. It's kind of like what Ubisoft has been doing with all of their physical game releases, where the physical editions require an online connection to install. There's a patch you have to download so that the game can boot at all, which effectively renders the physical media useless. And we've also been seeing the way game keycards have been negatively impacting upgrade paths from Switch 1 to Switch 2. For example, Octopath Traveler 0. This is a game that Square Enix has confirmed is not possible to upgrade from the Switch version to the Switch 2 version once purchased. There are also no plans for an option to upgrade to the Switch 2 version in the future. Please make sure you purchase the correct version. So people who want the physical version of Octopath Traveler 0 have to resort to getting the Switch 1 version, but then they don't have all those Switch 2 upgrades. And if you do want those Switch 2 upgrades, you have to essentially forego your ownership of that game and get a game keycard. Something similar happened with Sonic Shadow Generations, where people got the Switch 1 version, but there's no upgrade path to the Switch 2 version, and the Switch 2 version is a game keycard. It's just a really shitty position to put customers in, and it's a shitty position to put preservation efforts in. There are third-party entities doing their best to try to preserve games industry history, but the games industry itself just really doesn't seem to care about that stuff. And if anything, sabotaging third-party efforts through formats like game keycards that, while sure, it's convenient in terms of, cost-cutting measures for companies who want to ship something that resembles physical media but ultimately isn't, so it's almost like a little deceptive for customers and preservation and for the existence of these games that are artworks that, should be etched in the stones of history. It's just none of this is beneficial for all that. It's a huge detriment to those kinds of efforts and just to the general idea of people having some semblance of ownership or, autonomy of access over products that they purchase, which is a basic concept of commerce. I think the only way for preservation to kick into full gear is for government entities to enact legislation that essentially enforces games preservation in the form of digital media. They have to build essentially a digital museum and mandate that companies actually keep that in mind when they release their games and their products. But those kinds of efforts have just not been going well. For example, the Video Game History Foundation recently tried to push for a petition to allow libraries and archives to remotely share digital access to out-of-print video games in their collections. But the Copyright Office denied those efforts because they felt that the concerns of game publishers who feared that, people would essentially gain access to the games for free and wouldn't use those libraries that preserve games for research purposes, but for recreational purposes. The Copyright Office supported those claims instead of the ultimate benefit of preserving art. These are all reasonings that you could apply to regular, book libraries as well. People rent out books from libraries for recreational purposes as much for research purposes, but the existence of libraries doesn't mean that the sales of books, are completely in tatters, because people still want to own their own copy of books that they really enjoy. It just sucks to see that Nintendo has normalized game key cards as a format, and we can see that third-party entities are more than happy to take advantage of that cheaper, less consumer-friendly option, because the option is there and there's no caveats to it, except for the fact that, there's backlash, but not enough that they are hesitant to use the game keycard format. Right now, most third-party entities are more than happy to use that format. But yeah, the more time passes, the more we learn about game keycards and what a detriment they are on numerous facets, especially where games preservation is concerned. And it just sucks to see that this is the road we're headed in. But we're seeing efforts like Stop Killing Games gaining traction, and we're seeing legislators pick up on this issue, and we're seeing them pay a little more attention. And so down the line, maybe there will be efforts that, can legally ensure that companies take preservation and, product ownership of customers who purchase product, more seriously. But only time will tell. Until then, though, at least it's important to have awareness of what's going on right now. With now Japan's National Diet Library saying that game keycards are not viable to be preserved, calling them essentially digital products, digital releases. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is everything you need to know about the latest surrounding Nintendo Switch 2 game keycards and the current state of games preservation and physical media as a whole. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on all of this, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.